Looking at this first example, it says calculate the interquartile range of the following data set. So looking back at our anchor chart, I know that the first thing I need to do before I can do anything with the median or the quartiles is I need to put my data set in order from least to greatest. Now that I have my data in order from least to greatest, I need to find the median of my data set. So what I like to do, as I went over in my videos last week, I like to count how many pieces of data there are. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 pieces of data. So since I have 9 pieces of data, I know that there is going to be one digit that is exactly in the middle of my data set. So I know that if I have 9 pieces of data, if I go from the left, moving right, I have 4 digits, and then I have another 4 digits. I see that the middle or the median of my data set is exactly 17. I know based off my introduction to new vocabulary that the median is also referred to as quartile 2 or Q2. Now I need to find my quartile 1 and my quartile 3. So remember that the quartile 1 is the median of the lower half of the data set. So this part. And then quartile 3 is the median of the upper half of our data set. So as I look at the lower half of my data set, I see that I have 4 digits. If I have an even number of digits, I know that I am going to have to find the average of my 2 middle numbers. So the 2 middle numbers of our lower half are 15 and 16. So I'm going to find the average of those two by adding 15 and 16 together, which is 31. And then I'm going to take 31 divided by 2 to get the average, since there are 2 pieces of data, and I get 15 and 5/10. So right here, my quartile 1 is 15 and 5/10. My median or my quartile 2 is 17, and now I need to find my quartile 3, which is the median of the upper half of my data set. So I see that the upper half of my data set has 2 numbers exactly in the middle. However, the average of the same number, so the average of 19 and 19, is just 19. So quartile 3 is 19. So now I need to recall, what does it mean to find the interquartile range? I know that typically, if I'm just talking about range in general, that is the difference between the largest number in the data set and the smallest. However, interquartile range is talking about the range between quartile 3 and quartile 1. So in order to find the interquartile range, or the IQR, I need to take quartile 3, which is 19, and subtract quartile 1, which is 15 and 5/10, to get 3 and 5/10. So the interquartile range of this data set is 3 and 5/10. So that means the range between quartile 1 and quartile 3. Looking at this second example, it says the list below represents the low temperatures this winter in Utah. So we see 11, 19, 17, 16, 20, 15, 16, and 22. Ken said, okay, so Ken said that the interquartile range for the temperatures was 11. Dina said it was 4. Which student was right? Okay, so now we need to not only evaluate the interquartile range, we then need to compare their answers to see who is correct. So before I can find the interquartile range, I need to take the numbers in my data set and order them from least to greatest. So now that I have them in order from least to greatest, I want to first find quartile 2, which is the median. So in order to find the median, I like to count and see how many pieces of data are in my data set. So I see that I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I know that if I have an even number of pieces of data, I'm going to have to find the average of the two middle numbers to find the median. So since there are 8 pieces of data, I know that there needs to be 4 pieces of data from the left and 4 pieces of data on the right. So now I see that 16 and 17 are my two middle numbers. So I need to find quartile 2, my median, which is going to be the average of 16 and 17. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add 16 and 17, and I get 33, and then I need to divide by 2 to find the average, which is 16 and 5/10. So now that I have found quartile 2, which is my median, I'm going to find quartile 1. Quartile 1 is going to be the median of the lower half of my data set. So since my quartile 2 was in between 16 and 17, the numbers that I am looking at for my lower half are going to be all 4 of these, so 11, 15, 16, and 16. Just like I will look at the upper half of my data to find quartile 3. So I know that since I'm looking at 4 pieces of data on the lower half of my data display, I need to find the average or the mean of the two middle numbers. So the two middle numbers are 15 and 16. So to find quartile 1, I'm going to do the same process I did with quartile 2. So if I add 15 and 16 together, I get 31, and if I take 31 and divide it by 2, I get 15 and 5/10, which is also just the halfway point between 15 and 16. So if you have numbers that are right next to each other on a number line, 15 and 16, the halfway point is just going to be 15 and a half, which this decimal shows. So I'm going to do the same process with the upper half of my data set. So I see that my two middle numbers are 19 and 20. So I need to find the average of those two. So again, 19 and 20 are consecutive numbers, so I can find their average by just finding the number that is in the middle. So the halfway point between 19 and 20 for quartile 3 is just 19 and a half, or 19 and 5/10. So lastly, I'm going to use all of this information. If I have these 3 key pieces of data, I am able to find my interquartile range by taking quartile 3, which is 19 and 5/10, and subtracting, because I'm finding the difference of quartile 1, which is 15 and 5/10, which gives me an answer of 4. So the interquartile range of this data set is 4. So remember, we are given added information that we need to analyze next. So back up at our story problem, it says that Ken thinks that the interquartile range was 11. Dina said it was 4. Which student was right? Well, based on all of our work, we found on our own the interquartile range to be 4. Therefore, Dina is correct. Dina is correct because she followed all of the steps that we did. She found her quartile 2, and then she found her quartile 1, then she found her quartile 3, and then found the difference between quartile 3 and quartile 1 to find an IQR of 4. And finally, looking at this last example, it says Juan's last 8 math quiz scores were 78, 87, 85, 82, 92, 77, and 99. The question is asking us to calculate the IQR of the data set. So I know if I'm going to evaluate this data, these 8 pieces of data, I need to first put them in order from least to greatest. Now that I have ordered these quiz scores from least to greatest, I also already know that we are given 8 math quiz scores based on the introduction to this story problem. I know that if I have 8 pieces of data in a data set, that is an even amount. That means I'm going to have to find the average of the 2 middle numbers to find the median or the quartile 2 of this data set. So I know that if I have 8 pieces of data, that means there is going to be 4 pieces of data on the left and 4 pieces of data on the right. And Miss Bryce forgot one. And Miss Bryce realized what she forgot. She forgot that there was another one. There was another 99 that I crossed off or cropped out on accident. So let's take a moment to backtrack. Now we are good to go. So now I see that I have 4 pieces of data on the left and 4 pieces of data on the right. So I know that my quartile 2, or my median, is going to be the average of 85 and 87. So again, I have these 2 numbers that are very close to each other on the number line. I know that I can always find the average by adding them up and dividing by 2. However, the average of these 2 numbers is just the halfway point between them. So I know that halfway between 85 and 87 is the only other whole number that could be in between them, which is 86. I also know that if I have even numbers in the lower half of my data set and the upper half of my data set, I will have to find the average of the 2 middle numbers. So let's look at the lower half of our data set first. Looking at the lower half of our data set, so these numbers right here, I know that I have to find the 2 middle numbers, which are 78 and 82, and I need to find the average of those to find out what the IQR is of those in order to find the IQR later on. So, So when I want to find the average of 78 and 82, I add them together to get 160. 160 divided by 2 gives me 80. So that means our quartile 1, or Q1, is 80. Now I need to find my quartile 3, which is going to be halfway, or the average between 92 and 99. So if I take 92 and add 99, I get 191. And when I divide that by 2, I find that my quartile 3 is 95 and 5/10. So lastly, if I'm going to calculate the IQR, I know that if I have my Q1, Q2, and Q3 values, I'm able to solve. I can take 95 and 5/10, my quartile 3, and subtract 80, which is my quartile 1, to find the range between those two numbers in the data set. When I take 80 away from 95 and 5/10, I get 15 and 5/10 as my IQR of this data set.